one of those days. Dr. DeTavio's diligent focus on educational encounters of all sorts continues to allow students to expand their horizons and allows Tarleton to avail our students of a once-in-a-lifetime event to learn from men and women who have unique stories to tell and legendary experiences to share. Let's give Dr. Dominic DeTavio, president of Tarleton State University, a round of applause to thank him for bringing one of those legends to campus. I'm privileged to be able to introduce to you a remarkable man. Ben Barnes is originally from a very small town near here, DeLeon, Texas. We are proud to be able to say he is one of our alums. He attended Tarleton when we were a two-year institution, and we're proud to consider him one of our very own. He then attended the University of Texas School of Business and received his law degree from the university. At the age of 26, so that may be on your test, 26, in 1965, he was chosen as Speaker of the House in Austin. He was the youngest occupant of that office since Ira Evans had presided over the House of Representatives during the 12th legislature of 1870 to 1871. It was as a student that Mr. Barnes became interested in politics while working for the State Department of Health. Later, as a student, he successfully ran for a seat in the House of Representatives following his graduation. As a resident of DeLeon and Comanche County, Barnes served in the 57th through 60th legislatures. While a representative, Barnes served as chairman of the House Rules Committee and vice chairman of the Banks and Banking Committee, in addition to serving as liaison between Governor John Connally and Speaker Byron Tunnell. In 1967, Barnes won a second term as Speaker of the 60th legislature. The following year, he was elected lieutenant governor. Winning a second term in that office as well, Barnes presided over the Senate in the 61st and 62nd legislatures. As Speaker, Barnes established the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board and secured a minimum wage for farm workers. He also supported the passage of the Consumer Credit Code, of clean air and water quality legislation, of legislation establishing programs for the elderly, and of legislation to aid the mentally ill and handicapped. As Lieutenant Governor, he successfully backed an increase in the minimum wage, legislation in the area of mass transportation, and legislation creating the Texas Rehabilitation Commission. Throughout his 4 terms in the 2 offices, Barnes was also interested in the issue of higher education. During that time, Texas increased its appropriations for higher ed more than 3-fold, and several new universities and graduate schools originated as a result of increased appropriations. Additionally, the former legislator has served as the United States representative to the NATO Civil Defense Committee Conference in Brussels and as a special representative to the United Nations in Geneva in 1968. Once leaving elected office, Barnes has actively pursued his many professional interests, including being a successful business executive and civic leader. He is an author, and I believe you'll have a chance to see some of his books and perhaps purchase one, and the founder of the Ben Barnes Group, a business and consulting and lobbying firm. He has served as consultant and a director or chairman of more than 24 companies, including SBC Communications, American Airlines, Grumman Systems Support Corporation, and the Barnes-Connolly Partnership. His father and my grandfather worked together for roughly 45 years on the Humble Pipeline, and I'm here to tell you, I wasn't there back then, but I've heard the stories. It was no cushy job in an air-conditioned office where your hands didn't get dirty. I hope you can glean from him that humble beginnings, a strong work ethic, a good education, and determination like no other can carry you far in life. It carried Mr. Barnes from DeLeon to Austin and around the world. It's my privilege to introduce to you our esteemed guest lecturer today, Mr. Ben Barnes.
Kelly, thank you for that very generous and very exaggerated introduction. But she's probably the only person in the room other than me that really knows where DeLeon is. And so they really can't validate all the things that she said. Unless if I know find the morgue of the DeLeon Free Press, our weekly paper. I am so glad to be here today. And Mr. President, I want to thank you for the invitation. And this is my grandson, Kelly Barnes, is with me. Kelly, stand up. I want somebody to get a good applause. It was 55 years ago, and I hate to think about that it's been that long ago. It was 55 years ago that I was a student on campus. And riding over here on the golf cart that I think maybe your president didn't think I was still young enough to walk, and so they provided me a golf cart, which I appreciate very much. But to see the Dick Smith and who taught me government at Tarleton, and Ms. Glover taught me English in the old classroom building we went by, and see Dr. Grant's name, it's brought back a flood of memories, and I'm so thankful that Tarleton has progressed from that 1,000 student junior college when I was here to a great university, a part of the University of Texas A&M system, and over 9,000 students that you're fortunate to be a part of the student body. I did play football with Kelly's uncle and her father. We did beat the Stephenville Yellow Jackets in 1955 by a score of 38-24 on Thanksgiving Day. I kicked off, and the only thing I remember about that game is that the wind was blowing about 40 knots, and I got to kick off with the wind. And that's the only time I ever kicked a kickoff out of the end zone in my whole career, because I couldn't kick the ball very far. We didn't have anybody who could kick very far. But that 40-mile-an-hour wind, I kicked the ball out of the end zone. Now, that was my memorable day in Stephenville. I was born a few miles from here, and my dad was a peanut farmer and did work on the Humboldt pipeline. And I came to realize, as my life took me away from Comanche County and Erath County, that how fortunate I was to have been born in Comanche County, and really how fortunate I was to have been born of poor parents. We didn't know we were poor. I didn't understand. My world was very small. We would come from De Leon. We really lived between De Leon and Dublin. We'd come to Stephenville to shop, and Stephenville was the biggest town that I knew about in Texas until I went to the Fort Worth Fat Stock Show on an FAA trip. My world was rather small. We didn't have any electricity until I was in the third grade, the first and second grade. And this is not an Abraham Lincoln born in a log cabin story, but I didn't know that that was anything, the hardship about studying with a coal oil lamp. We had outdoor plumbing. I didn't realize that everybody didn't have outdoor plumbing. It was a life that really, I think, prepared me for later years. And I'm sure any of you, some of you are here probably on student loans, and maybe you didn't study on kerosene lamps, and you didn't have outdoor plumbing, but a lot of you have had difficulty, and you're here because you're on tenacious in your ambition and your opportunity to get an education. But I assure you, appreciate the moment and appreciate the opportunities you have. I'm going to try to save a lot of time for questions, and I apologize. I'm going to talk a little bit about my career and what happened to me, and maybe we can learn a little bit from that. But I'll tell you that I was a student at the University of Texas working at the State Health Department, and I got to be supervisor at the Bureau of Vital Statistics. And the primary purpose of the Bureau of Vital Statistics is we filed the death and birth certificates. Of course, we didn't have computers then, so someone would die or someone would be born, and we'd take these massive books, take the screws out, take the birth certificate or the death certificate, file it in alphabetical order, put the screws back in, and put the record book back up on the shelf. Well, as supervisor of the part-time employees, I had to sign the checks for the concession stand we had in the lobby. We sold drinks and peanut patties. Y'all went out and know what peanut patties are, but I remember that was our best-selling candy bar. But we made a little money. We sent flowers to people when they got sick or someone had a death in the family. But it generated some money, and the Commissioner's Health administrative assistant came up to me the first month that I had gotten to this promotion and had to go sign the checks, and he said, "Here, sign these checks." Well, I looked at them. There was a Tower Hotel, a Tower liquor store, and then we had private clubs in Texas then, and they had all this money that was owed to the Tower Hotel, private club, and Tower liquor store. And I said, well, what are these checks for? And he said, it's really basically, he said, it's none of your business. It's not important. You just sign these checks. Well, I really didn't want to do that. And he came back in about 2 hours and said, let me have the checks. And I said, I hadn't signed them yet. He said, well, I tell you, they better be on my desk in the morning or you're not going to have a job. So this really bothered me. And there was a former member of the legislature that I knew in Austin, and I went to his house and told him what had happened. He said, well, I think I ought to take you up to the legislature and let you talk to a couple of members of the House and tell them the story. Well, I did, and I'd been to the Capitol maybe one time as a tourist. I loved Dick Smith's government class. Government was always very something I was interested in, but I had no plans to run for office. I never dreamed of being in public office. That's not something I planned. But as a result of my going up to the Capitol, the Commissioner of Health and his assistant, his secretary, were all fired. They had to plead to a misdemeanor. The Commissioner of Health had to give up his medical license, and they had to move out of Texas. Today, they would have probably actually been indicted for a felony because of the total amount of money that they had taken over a period of time was about $27,000, and they had to go and reimburse that to the state. Well, I'd been to the Capitol 3 or 4 times and testified then, and what a beautiful building it was. Walking from the health department up in those huge trees, I just said, this is really something. This is where power is. This is what an opportunity that it would be to be able to come back up here and be a member of the Texas House of Representatives. So very foolishly, I was a freshman in law school. I was 21 years old, and 4 or 5 of my classmates got together at coffee one morning. Some gave $50 and others gave $100, but I had $300 in my pocket, and I went back to Comanche County and Brown County and Mills County, and I filed for state representative. And I had no business winning. My opponent was a person who'd served in the Second World War. He'd served in a German concentration camp, came back a war hero, and he was a fine man. He took me for granted. I knocked on every door, and fortunately I won, or unfortunately for the district, but fortunately for me I won, and that began my political career. I was very, very blessed to be a part of an era that was exciting in Texas politics and national politics. A lot of tragic events happened during my tenure in office, and that's one of the reasons that I wrote the book, that you're not going to have to buy it. I've got some books back there. If you after you hear me and you still want one of those books, it's going to be my gift to you, and mine and the President's gift to you. But the 60s, John Connally, governor of Texas, and President Johnson, vice president, asked me to help coordinate the trip of Jack Kennedy's trip to Texas in 1963, the terrible time that happened in Texas and happened in America when a president was assassinated. And so I helped plan the trip, and I went with John Connally to the White House. I got to meet Jack Kennedy on a Sunday afternoon talking about the trip to Texas. We made the arrangements. We worked. There was a great debate about whether to have a parade in Dallas, and we didn't want the parade in Dallas. Not that we thought something would happen to President Kennedy, but it was just a time problem. And Dallas had been rude to Adlai Stevenson. It had been rude to the Johnsons. They walked across the street between 2 hotels, and some women with Bruce Alger signs, who was a Republican congressman at that time, they actually spat on the Johnsons as they walked across there. We were scared about something like this. No one had any idea that anything else would happen like this. And to show you how fate plays a role in history, and how it's going to play a role in all your lives, and it already has probably, we decided to finally have the parade in about 10 days prior to Jack Kennedy coming to Dallas. He was going to go to those of you who've been to the fair, there's a woman's building at the state fair. The woman's building would hold more than the trademark building where Jack Kennedy was going to make the speech when he was assassinated. And only about 4 days before that, we decided to go to the World Trade Mart as opposed to the woman's building at the state fair. If we'd have gone to the woman's building, the motorcade would have not ever come down that street, ever slowed down to make that turn where Oswald could stay in the book depository. And if you've ever been to Dallas and looked down from the 6th floor of most of you are hunters. Everybody says it's just a miracle that he could kill Kennedy. It wasn't a miracle at all. Most of the people in this room that know how to use a deer rifle, you could have shot Kennedy. Anyone. The car was going about 5 miles an hour, and it's looking down. It's a very easy shot, unfortunately. But that was only decided 4 days before that time. Jack Kennedy spoke in Fort Worth that morning. It was raining in Fort Worth. And some of you have seen a famous photograph of Vice President Johnson, President Kennedy, Governor Conley, standing out on the parking lot where the speech was after the breakfast in Fort Worth. And they all had on raincoats. The Secret Service wanted Kennedy not to go by car from Fort Worth to Dallas, but to go in Air Force One for security reasons. It's only a 10-minute flight. When they got on Air Force One at the airport in Fort Worth, it was still raining. They held umbrellas for Jacqueline Kennedy and Nellie Conley as they got on the plane. Sometime during that 10-minute flight, let's just say Arlington, I don't know that it was Arlington, but let's just say over Arlington, the sun came out, the rain clouds went away, and a Secret Service agent on Air Force One called down to Love Field and told another Secret Service agent, take the bubble off the car. The bulletproof bubble was on the car at Love Field, waiting for Conley and waiting for Kennedy, President Kennedy, to get in that car. If it had not stopped raining, they would have had the clear plastic bubble that was bulletproof, and Lee Harvey Oswald's bullets would not have reached the president and Governor Conley. It's very unusual, very strange how things happen like that. The death happened. John Conley was wounded. We didn't expect him to live. He did live, going to serve as governor for 3 years. I became Speaker of the House in 1965. Kelly told you that I was 26 years old. I probably should not have been elected. I was very fortunate. But boy, I tell you what, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed every minute of it. I was so nervous. I spent all my life up until the last 2 years trying to look older. I'd wear blue suits, and I'd try to comb my hair, and I'd just try to do everything. I'd try to walk older because I was so conscious about the fact that I was so young. And there was only one person in the House that was younger than me, and I was Speaker. And then when I was Lieutenant Governor at 30 years old, everybody in the Senate was older than me. Matter of fact, the person that was the closest to me was 7 years older than me. So I spent all those young years trying to look older. Now I'm trying to look younger, and I'm not doing a very good job of it. But I had a very interesting time. And some other real tragic events happened. Robert Kennedy was assassinated in Los Angeles. Dr. Martin Luther King, the greatest civil rights leader that's ever lived, was assassinated in Tennessee. 3 tragic deaths in the span of the 12 years that I was in office. A president decided not to run because of Vietnam. The only incumbent president not ever to not seek re-election in the last 100 years. Lyndon Johnson did not run and hoped that he could negotiate a peace settlement in the most controversial war that the United States has ever fought. And unfortunately, he didn't. But these were challenging times. They were interesting times. Things were happening in Texas, and I got to go to, as Kelly said, I got to go to Europe and be an ambassador to the United Nations and to visit all the NATO installations in Europe. What an incredible opportunity for somebody that really worried about passing English in Miss Glover's class at Tarleton. It was an incredible opportunity. The world has changed as Tarleton has changed. You have a very outstanding president who's doing a great job of taking this institution and reaching new heights every day. I'm so excited to be here. But I want to talk to you for just a minute, and then we're going to ask questions, and I'll give somebody equal time. But today, America, I hope we're not facing another period of assassinations or another period of such an extremely unpopular war as faced during the times that were in my challenging years in the 60s and 70s. But America is divided today. We've got very serious economic problems. We've got very serious deficit problems. We've got troops in Afghanistan that are in harm's way. We've got Iran that's got or may have nuclear weapons. We've got Syria that 60 people were killed again last night, even though the UN observers are there. We've seen the Arab Spring where Egypt and the other countries in the Middle East broke away from their traditional dictatorship governments. Things are changing. China has emerged as a world economic power, but yet they too now have economic problems. Western Europe is in the worst financial conditions since the end of World War II. All of these things are not problems that you read about in the Stephenville paper or the Fort Worth paper. They're not what you see on television or what you see on the online publications and the bloggers. These problems are not somebody else's problems. They're your problems, and you're going to have to deal with them. And every time that you think that you're reading something, or some professor is talking about something that you don't think that you've got a damn bit of interest in, and you say, well, I don't care about this. This is not ever going to affect me. I'm going to go be an engineer. I'm going to go in the agriculture business, or I'm going to go teach, or I'm going to go into business. And those things, those are foreign to me. They're not somebody else's problems. They're your problems. And I think the greatest problem we have today, and I hope every single one of you vote. As a matter of fact, I hope that the chairman of the Democratic Party here in Erath County is on the faculty, and I just met her. She's a wonderful person. I don't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. You've got to get involved in this political system of ours today because it's broken. I believe truly that the greatest problems we have today is not Afghanistan, it's not our debt, it's not the fact that Europe is in turmoil and undergoing transition, it's not the fact that China is making computers at half the price that we can manufacture them, but the real problem today in America is the very bitter partisanship that exists in the halls of Congress, where men and women are black or white, and that not color figuratively, but they are liberal, conservative. They're Republican or they're Democrat. When I first went to Washington, Republicans and Democrats would fight like heck during the day, and they'd eat supper together at night and have drinks, and their wives loved one another, their husbands loved one another. They got along. It was a cordial atmosphere where people were putting the country first. Today, that's not true. Today, it's I got you politics, and it's not enough to beat someone. The first thing that happens today when someone announces against someone for Congress, I don't think it may happen to state representatives or state senators, but on the federal level, the first thing they do when someone wants to run against somebody is that they go hire a private investigator to try to find out any negative thing in that person's life, to go over to release that, not only to win, but to really actually destroy the families. And another thing that's happened is redistricting. What happens is the state legislatures have become very partisan. They draw the lines to favor the Republicans if the Republicans are controlled, or if the Democrats are in control, the Democrats draw the lines. There's equal blame to go around. So what happens is, it's not the people of Erath County that you've got to get along with, because your district is going to be drawn where it's 80% Republican or 80% Democrat. So you don't have to be right on the issues. You've got to be right on the issues for the political parties. And so as a result, the Democratic Party has moved a little bit to the left. Republican Party has moved way to the right with the Tea Parties now. And it's unbelievable. We've just watched this Republican primary. Good men, good people. I think Governor Romney's a good man. I know Senator Sarbanes. I know former Speaker in the United States. They're all good people. They love America. But what's happened is everybody has had to go to the right to try to win the Republican nomination. President Obama has probably gone to the left in some instances when he did not have to. I disagree with the president about the pipeline. The pipeline needs to be built, and it's a mistake not to build it. Pipelines can be built safely, and they're a lot safer than 10,000 gasoline trucks hauling petroleum or hauling gasoline on the highways. but that's, I'll give somebody equal time to argue that in a minute. But it's the political parties and the partisanship that's at slip. I want you to participate in politics, but I want you to look at the issues. I want you to look at the candidates. And there's not a thing wrong with voting for a Republican if you're a Democrat, or voting for a Democrat if you're a Republican. You need to look at the ideas and thoughts and qualifications of the people running for office, because that's more important. I'm a Democrat. I love the Democratic Party, but that's not is the most significant thing, is solving these problems, bringing about nonpartisanship that works in Washington. I want to give you now time to ask questions, and we'll talk about anything you got to. We've got a few more minutes. What time are these classes supposed to be over? 10:40? Oh, we've got a lot of time left.